58 games into the season, I think it's safe to say we've seen enough to make the claim that these Cavaliers are one of the best teams in recent NBA history. And I'd argue that the biggest difference between this year and last has been Evan Mobley taking that next leap, not just into an all-star, but into a legitimate all-NBA caliber player. As things currently stand, he's one of the top 2 favorites to win Defensive Player of the Year, and it's on that side of the ball where he's always made his mark. Of course, it starts with his ability to protect the rim. He's officially listed as 6'11", and that sheer size alone allows him to stand tall and offer a serious presence down low. With the height, he's got a 7'4" wingspan, and those freakishly long arms allow him to just erase finishing angles. I'd say it's the athleticism at his size that's most impressive though. He's a very explosive leaper off of 2 feet, and the way he springs off the court with little to no momentum almost looks like he's on a trampoline. As a result, he's able to have really unique timing as a shot blocker. On this one, both of his feet are still on the ground when DeLon Wright releases a layup, yet he's still able to get to it. That also means he has an elite second jump, so on a play like this where he commits to one threat and leaves his feet, he can recover to a second threat and get just as much lift. When you have that much size, length, and verticality, and you're also great at targeting the ball, that's how you end up with a guy like Mobley who can completely dictate an offense's ability to score in the paint. On the season, he's averaging 2 blocks every 75 possessions, good for 13th in the NBA among players with at least 1,000 minutes. But I'd argue that doesn't even do his rim protection justice. He's contested 378 shots within 6 feet, the 8th most of any player, and on those shots, players have converted almost 10% below their typical average. That's enough to make him one of the best paint defenders in the league, and it's enough to make offensive players think twice about going up in his vicinity, giving you that deterring effect. With that said though, the drawback of moving in the way that he does with the length is that he's got a pretty skinny frame and is a little bit more prone to bully ball. I don't really view him as the type of big you can leave on an island and expect to shut down post-up guys. In those situations, he tends to rely on help defenders loading up early, and that way he can use those long arms to contest shots over the top. But don't get me wrong, he does have some good possessions against elite bigs. This time he's on Jokic in single coverage, and he's quick enough to stick with a drive, then gets a hand up to make it a tougher look. However, I do think that Jarrett Allen's clearly the best post defender on Cleveland, and he's more of a traditional anchor big. So when those two share the floor together, more times than not, Mobley's operating behind the play like a free safety. They usually like to match him up with the opposing team's weakest spot-up shooter, in this case Russell Westbrook, and he'll just freely roam the floor to either protect the rim or take away the middle of the floor on drives without having to worry about recovering to his man. And in these spots, he makes a lot of great reads. Here's one where Allen plays the ball in a hedge while Yabusele pops into open space on the wing. Mobley, as the low man, is forced into a 2-on-1 situation, and he immediately springs into position right between them to not give up a pass, while still making Yabusele think twice about a triple. The reason this works so well is because of the amount of ground he's able to cover as an athlete. Anytime he helps in the paint, it takes very little effort for him to get right back to his man on the perimeter, meaning he's able to cover both layups and threes. If you wanted to point to one flaw of his in these spots though, I'd say he does have a slight tendency to overhelp in the paint at times, so he can find himself in positions where there's no way to recover. Such as on this play against the Magic. LeVert does a great job of staying in front of Suggs and stopping his drive, but Mobley kind of just hangs around the block instead of getting back to the corner, so it's an easy kick out to Jonathan Isaac, who's left with a warm-up triple. More times than not though, he's pretty sharp with his rotations and knows which plays to make. On this one, Horford drives baseline, and Mobley very clearly recognizes the threat, but instead of committing to the ball, he gets into the lane, then follows a pass into a contest on Jaylen Brown. This time he's matched up with Derek White as the low man, and when Tatum gets downhill, he's forced to step in front of a drive. Then the Cavs are going to execute what's called an X-out, with Garland closing to the corner and Mobley closing to the wing. Horford tries to attack the closeout, only for Mobley to stay in front and block a layup. Mobley's ability to not only cover the ground needed on closeouts, but contain attacks and stay glued to the ball on drives is something we basically never see from someone of his size, which is a testament to his versatility. If you watch him defend in space, he really moves like a wing. Not only is he quick laterally, he's got fluid hips, which allows him to consistently close off driving lanes. In my opinion, it's his body control that makes him such a complete outlier. It's one thing to stick with drives, it's an entirely different thing to shift your momentum to stick with quick guards and not give them even an inch of room to work with. Then after showcasing the mobility and body control to stay in front of attacks, if anyone tries to score over the top, they're met by one of those long arms. As a result, he's capable of matching up with the best forwards in the league. This time he's guarding LeBron, and you can see that agility and hip mobility as he cuts off two different angles, then absorbs some contact and forces a travel. Here's one where he's up against Tatum, and once again, he moves his feet to stay in front of a drive, absorbs a bump to the chest, and recovers to get a hand up on the jumper. It can't be overstated how valuable it is for your starting four to be this versatile. The Cavs have a defensive chess piece that very few teams, if any, can match. In one of their games at the beginning of the season, they actually used him as the primary defender on Franz Wagner. And he didn't just hold his own, he played legitimately elite defense from start to finish. Franz couldn't get anything going towards the rim because of Mobley's agility, and he was forced into tough looks over the top all night. But Mobley's presence as a perimeter defender isn't exclusive to bigger wings. Here's one where he's matched up with Jalen Brunson, cuts off two different attempts at an attack, and forces the offense to reset entirely. And when he's defending quicker guards, it's not like he sags off with a cushion of space to prepare for their speed. Here's one against Dame where he actually presses up to the ball nearly 30 feet out, shuts off a drive, then sticks with a step back to force a smothered long two. When it comes to defending on the perimeter, I'd say Mobley's lone weakness is that he doesn't really know how to navigate screens, which some teams can take advantage of by having a smaller guy set one and force the switch onto a mismatch. But outside of that, the Cavs are 100% comfortable with Mobley defending just about anyone in the league in isolation, and they'll live with the results of those plays. And that gives him so much versatility when defending the pick and roll, because if they want to, they can switch every action and not have to worry about him being attacked. But remember, he's also an elite rim protector who can cover a ton of ground, so he can also execute any traditional coverage with just as much effectiveness. Allen and Mobley start and close games together. Everything in between is a stagger though, which means he spends a lot of time as the lone big. I wouldn't say he's quite the drop defender that Allen is, but he's turned himself into a very capable one. Something I really like about his drop defense is how much he prioritizes the ball. He doesn't let guards step into uncontested mid-range jumpers or drive to the paint without seeing a body at all times. And because of his agility, it feels like he's never out of position. On this one, he's getting ready to defend a left-hand screen, but when Koulibaly rejects it on a right-hand drive, he immediately springs into that lane to protect the rim. With that said though, in most of these minutes of Mobley at the 5, the Cavs like to just switch everything so that they can keep a body in front of the ball and prevent a numbers advantage. That takes me right back to the discussion of Mobley's switchability. He isn't a mismatch, so they can switch as many actions as they want to keep him in front of the ball, and the offense won't find that advantage they're looking for off of screens. I actually think Mobley's ability to play the 5 not just well, but at a legitimately elite level, is probably his strongest case for Defensive Player of the Year. In lineups with Allen, he does it all, from roaming behind the play as a free safety, to running shooters off the line and switching across the board. But in lineups without Allen, he's often the only rim protector on the floor, sometimes even the only above average athlete on the floor, and those units still produce shockingly good defensive results. If we exclude garbage time, Mobley and Allen have played about 1,400 minutes together over the last 2 seasons, and during those minutes, the Cavs have had a 112.9 defensive rating. In over 2,300 minutes that Allen has played without Mobley, that number has remained at 113, and in 1,400 minutes that Mobley has played without Allen, they've actually improved to 110. For reference, the league's average during that span has been 115.6, so those Mobley minutes are really good. I actually want to dive a little deeper though, because it's truly remarkable how much he's raising some of these lineups. Like I said, they've had a 110 defensive rating when Mobley's on the floor without Allen. That means they could still have another big, versatile body in Dean Wade, but if we also take him off the floor, that number is still 111.3. Well, they could still have another elite perimeter defender in Isaac Okoro, but if we take him off as well, that number is right back to the original 113. In the last 2 seasons, he's played 757 minutes without any of the team's other 3 best defenders, and those lineups have produced a well above average defense. So if the combination of rim protection, switchability, and overall role versatility wasn't enough to sell you on his case for Defensive Player of the Year, maybe the numbers can get you there. If not, he's at worst a top 3 or so candidate, and in my opinion is inarguably a top 10 defender in the NBA. What's so crazy to me though is that this elite defensive value isn't anything new. I'd say this has been his best defensive season, but he entered the league and was already an All-NBA caliber defender as a rookie. When we talk about a leap from Evan Mobley, we're referring to what he's turned into on the offensive side of the ball this season and how that's completely changed his ceiling as a player. Because he's often sharing the floor with a non-shooting big in Jarrett Allen, one of the most important pieces of the team's offense is finding ways to keep up the spacing. In years past, that typically meant playing Mobley out of the dunker spot, where he can rely on his athleticism to not only finish plays, but get on the offensive glass and create second chance opportunities, playing a lot like a traditional big man. Kenny Atkinson made some changes though. Instead of starting Mobley in the dunker, he's moved him further out to the deep corner so that he can freely operate along the entire baseline. This change comes with a much improved and more confident outside shot, which I'll talk about in a bit, but the idea was to put the low man in a tough position where if they want to bring help to the middle, they also have to worry about Mobley diving behind them for easy offense. And he has incredible timing on these cuts, so he's able to effectively space the floor, while Allen's a good enough passer to consistently find him on these big-to-big connections. Speaking of big-to-big passing, Mobley can just as easily find Allen in the dunker, so a lot of times you'll see them reverse the roles. The problem with using Allen in the dunker instead is that he's usually the one who's being defended by the team's primary rim protector. But Mobley sort of mitigates that issue through his ability to finish over even the game's best shot blockers. He's aggressive, incredibly athletic, and most importantly has great touch, so he's able to score through traffic at the basket very well. This season, 51 players have attempted at least 200 shots at the rim, and of those 51, Mobley's been the second most efficient, making a remarkable 76.5% of them. So when he catches the ball in the short roll, he's the type of guy who the defense has to collapse on. Then if there's no lob or drop off to Allen, he'll kick it out to a shooter for a high quality 3. Of course, this is arguably even more dangerous during those minutes with him as a lone big, because Cleveland can surround him with 4 high-level shooters, giving him the entire paint to work with. With that said though, I'm more intrigued by Mobley's versatility off of screens, and in particular the way he's been working on his ability to pop into open space for 3-point shots of his own. Here's one where he's on the floor with Allen, and after handing the ball off to Garland, he pops out to the wing. He looks for the 3, draws an aggressive closeout, and attacks it on his way to easy points. If he becomes a guy who's drawing those sorts of contests, we can all go home. I don't think he's there yet, but the shooting development has been awesome to see. In his first 3 years in the NBA, he consistently attempted about 1.5 threes every 75 possessions. Well, this year he's up to 3.5, more than doubling the volume, and that's a big enough number to make the defense at least pay attention to him. Some of those are tough off the dribble looks, which is another thing Mobley's experimenting with and could be a terrifying future development, but I'm more so focused on those off the catch opportunities, whether that means spotting up in the corner, on the wing, or out of the pick and pop. In the last 2 seasons, he's attempted 184 catch and shoot threes, so not a ton of volume, but in that limited sample, he's made 38.6% of them. We're talking about a guy who can make the defense pay for leaving him open. As a result, he does occasionally draw those more aggressive closeouts, and in addition to the unique combination of size, athleticism, and touch, he's also a good enough ball handler to punish defenses as an attacker. I don't just mean straight line drives either. Here's one where his initial angle gets closed off and he quickly redirects into a new lane, then finds some space to take off for one of the best dunks of the season. I think now would be a great time to mention that for all of the changes to floor spacing and the shooting development, the biggest difference for Mobley has been that Atkinson simply put the ball in his hands more. That really stands out in transition. His combination of size, athleticism, handle, and touch is really only matched by Giannis, so he's pretty lethal in the open floor. And in those spots, not only is he a threat to create for himself, if he draws multiple defenders, he'll find the open man. Even in the half court though, whereas in years past it felt like Mobley could sometimes struggle to attack mismatches, now he's a legitimate option for isolations. I will say his back to the basket game is still super raw and probably the area where I'd expect the most future development. The drawback of so much fluidity is that he isn't the sturdiest or most physically imposing guy when it comes to strength, and he isn't too comfortable going to his left hand out of the post, so he struggles to create easy shots for himself. However, when it comes to his face-up game, he's pretty close to having the entire package. The handle and athleticism are just so tough to contain, and even if a defender's able to stay in front of him, he's still a big threat to score. Not just because he can finish over the top, but because he's implemented counters like this sharp spin to get into a jump hook. As a result, when he attacks in isolation, help defenders are often forced to react, and that's when he'll get back to making plays for others. Because of the ball handling and passing capability, the Cavs have sort of molded Mobley into a point forward within their offense. He brings the ball up a lot, and they like to have wings screen for him at the top of the key so that he can turn the corner and attack open space as a driver. Thanks to his unique skill set, defenses are often forced into an impossible spot. If they decide to switch, like I said, he's become really good at punishing mismatches. And I should also mention that if his defender tries to overplay the side of the screen, he's also a threat to reject it, while his length allows him to just cover so much ground in the paint. In the event that he's setting up a ball screen, rejects it but gets cut off, that's when you'll see those counters with the footwork and touch to still create a quality shot for himself. So some defenses choose to avoid Mobley's paint presence altogether by putting 2 on the ball, but he's a good passer, so the Cavs are often left with wide open threes. To me, there's really only one major flaw when it comes to Mobley's on-ball attack, and it's the complete lack of a mid-range jumper. There are a lot of situations where defenses respond to these ball screens by sitting way back in the paint, and he rarely ever makes them pay. On the season, he's shooting just 36% from the mid-range, good for the 21st percentile among all players, and getting that to even 42% would open up so much more for him. Not just in the pick and roll, but in isolation as another counter for when his driving lanes get taken away. It would also help grow his game away from the ball. Something the Cavs have explored is running Mobley off of down screens inside the arc, and oftentimes he has an open jumper, but instead tries to force the issue on a drive. Don't get me wrong though, if he catches that ball with space to attack, good luck stopping him from getting wherever he wants to go in the paint. It's no secret that most of Mobley's scoring is done around the basket, but the way he gets those opportunities is so much more layered than in years past. Whereas he used to pretty exclusively score off of lobs and putbacks, now he's diving into cutting lanes, attacking off the catch, creating an isolation or off of screens, and this is a huge deal because with the uptick in volume, he's also improved his efficiency. On the season, he's averaging about 22.5 points per 75 on over 64% true shooting. The only other player in the NBA who exceeds both of those marks is Nikola Jokic, who's arguably the best offensive player ever. So Mobley's been incredibly effective as a scorer, he's a pretty good passer, and he offers that lineup flexibility between the 4 and 5. As a result, he's had a high impact on one of the best offensive teams ever. The Cavs right now have an offensive rating that is 8.9 points higher than the league's average. Throughout all of NBA history, the only team to ever eclipse that mark was the 2004 Mavericks. Garland and Mitchell are the clear 1 and 2, but after that, you could argue Mobley's been their third most valuable offensive player, and he's certainly the third most involved. To be the number 3 on the second most efficient offense we've ever seen, while also being a favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, is a feat that very few players in the NBA can replicate. I actually think he's incredibly underrated for that exact reason. If you asked me, I'd say he's pretty comfortably been Cleveland's best overall player this season and is making a pretty strong case for the All-NBA second team, or dare I say even the first team with how some of the injuries have piled up. I'm still waiting to see how this offensive leap translates to the playoffs and whether the Cavs can remain a historically efficient offense, but I think Mobley might be a top 15 player in the league, and that's terrifying because there's still so much room for improvement. On offense, I'd say he'll probably continue to develop his 3-ball, and the two big things I'm looking for are whether or not he can become a legitimate post-up option and if he can add a reliable mid-range jumper. If that happens, we could be looking at an all-star level player on offense alone. Then you also account for the defense, which is already among the best in the league, but could still see some minor improvements, most notably in drop coverage, and that's the recipe for a prototypical two-way superstar. So if you haven't bought stock in Evan Mobley, I'd suggest you do so right now because his leap has been remarkable and his archetype might just tell us a little bit about where the future of basketball is headed. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Mobley. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.